welcome to lesson 24.3 in the Python tutorial series. We're going to continue our development today of the Weaponless Warrior game that we started back in 24.1. We're going to start from the base code that we finished in lesson 24.2. In the last lesson, we gave the user the ability to search for more items. In particular, they were able to find a dagger and a shield, and we added some random elements as well as adjusted the inventory checker to account for these new items. In lesson 24.3, we're going to further expand on this program and put in some limits on inventory. We're not going to let the user carry more than 5 rocks at any given time. If they try and pick up more than 5 rocks, it'll give a message that they're carrying too much. And because of this, we're also going to add a mechanic to our game where the user can discard items. Instead of simply throwing away a rock, they'll be able to choose throw away an item from a menu and then choose if they want to get rid of a rock, or if they found the dagger or the shield, they'll have the option to discard those as well. So let's go ahead and continue building the Weaponless Warrior program in lesson 24.3. So here we are back in our Python programming window. You can see that we have the exact same code that we left off lesson 24.2 with, and I'll go ahead and post these into the comments or the description of this video, so that if you haven't been following along, you'll have access to this code. Though I would highly advise, if you haven't built it yourself, I would go back to lesson 24.1 and 2 and kind of build the code up to this point so that you have a better idea of how the program logic works. So with that said, let's start making changes to our program to account for inventory limits and discarding items. Now, the ability for our user to search for rocks is all controlled in this search for item routine. So our inventory control is going to be found in this as well. Now, one thing that I do want to do with this search for item function right now is simply comment out our debugging line. I may want that back later, so I'm not going to erase the line, but I don't need it printing out the debugging code either. Now, the way I'm going to format this check is before running this whole routine right here, and this entire routine is kind of how the user searches for different items. I want to check their inventory before that happens. And the way I'm going to do that is with a simple inventory.count, and we'll count rocks. So let's add an if statement and say if the inventory count of rocks is less than 5, then we'll run this entire check. So since I've added a new if check, I'll simply tab everything over. So this search routine can only run if the current inventory has fewer than 5 rocks. Otherwise, we'll just print out a message that says, remember our escape sequence, you are unable to carry any more items, please drop something. And then we'll add our escape sequence to the end, like that. So now that we have that check in place, let's run our program and see if search for item is correctly limiting our user. So we'll run this program. We'll check our inventory to start off and see that we have 0 rocks. We're going to search for an item. We've got a rock, a second rock, a third rock, a fourth rock. So if we check our inventory now, we've got 5 rocks in our inventory. If we program this correctly, the next time we do a search routine, it will count that we do not have fewer than 5 rocks, skip down to this else statement, and tell us that we need to drop something. So let's search for something. You're unable to carry any more items, please drop something. Excellent. Now we should be able to throw a rock away, dropping our inventory of rocks to 4, and then search again, and see that we are able to pick up a rock. So with this pretty simple check right here, we've limited our user to only be able to pick up a maximum of 5 rocks in their inventory. Because we've added this new functionality, we're going to want our user to be able to throw away the dagger and shield that we added in lesson 24.2. So let's go ahead and make some changes to our main program loop to make this menu a little bit more accurate. Because now, they're simply not throwing a rock, they're going to be able to throw any item away. So instead of throw a rock, we're going to change this to throw away item. Because of that, I'm going to change the name of the function throw rocks to throw away. And then I'm going to go find where we call the throw rocks function here and change that to throw away. Now before I go any farther, I do want to check that and make sure that I made all the proper changes. You always want to do that when you change the name of a function. Just make sure that it's still working properly, because sometimes you'll find old function calls that don't have a correct name anymore. But making this change, I think, is important for long-term development because we're not limiting ourselves to just throwing rocks anymore. So let's try and throw away an item. We have no rocks to throw. Search for a usable item. We got a shield, so we still shouldn't be able to throw a rock. But we are throwing a rock, so there's a bug that we might need to address. The fact that we don't have a rock in our inventory, and we just hurled away our shield. So there's kind of an unseen bug right there that we might want to address right now. So the reason that bug is occurring is because our throwaway function right now is only checking the length of inventory. In other words, it's only checking to see if something's in the inventory. It doesn't necessarily care what that is. So what happened was when the user picked up the shield initially, their inventory length was 1, even though it was a shield and not a rock. Then, when we chose to throw an item away, it checked the length of the inventory, which was 1. 1 is greater than 0, so it printed out that we hurled a rock away and then ran inventory.pop. The trouble with inventory.pop is it took out the shield and we didn't actually throw a rock. So we're going to rebuild this throwaway function so that not only can the user choose what to discard depending on what's in their inventory, but also so we don't get this bug where the user inadvertently throws away the wrong item like we've done kind of here in our test program. So let's go ahead and get started rebuilding this throwaway function. For right now, I'm going to comment out the entire function. We're going to rebuild this from the ground up so that it works better for what we're doing. Now the first thing that I'm going to do is print a message to the user. What would you like to discard? I have to ask that now because it's possible that the user will have any number of items. They could have one or more rocks, they could have a single dagger, or they could have a single shield. Now, I want to build a menu based on what the user has. So I only want my menu to display what the user currently has in their inventory, and if they have nothing in their inventory, I want a message to display saying that their inventory is empty. So we'll use the count function with our inventory to see what the user has in their inventory at this given time. So let's check if the inventory has a count of rocks. So if the count is greater than 0, then the first item on our list will be rock. So if the user has a rock in their inventory, the menu will say, what do you want to discard? And then give the user the option to select rock. If the inventory counts any dagger, and of course the user can only have one dagger, but we'll still use greater than 0, then we know that there's a dagger in the inventory, and we'll print dagger on the menu, giving the user the option to discard the dagger. And the last thing we need to account for is the shield. So if the user, or if our function counts a shield in the inventory, that means shield will be greater than 0, and we'll print shield on our menu. Now, one of the problems we're going to have with this menu as it stands right now is it's possible none of these things are true. If the user's inventory is completely empty, they'll have 0 rocks, 0 daggers, and 0 shields, and we'll print what basically amounts to an empty menu. And I don't necessarily want to do that. I want to ask for input if the user has something in their inventory, but if they don't, I just want this function to break away, letting the user know that they have nothing to discard. So I've thought a little bit about how to easily do this with what we've covered so far in the tutorial series. And the way that we're going to address this in our program is to add a Boolean variable, a local variable, called hasItem. And this will start off at a value of false. That means when the throwaway function first works, it will identify that the user does not have an item because hasItem is set to false. If by any chance an item is counted in the inventory, we'll just change has item to true. And we'll do this for each of the checks. Now the reason we'll do this is if any of these end up being true, we know the user has at least one item. If it is able to execute all three of these if checks, and has item is still equal to false, then we know that our routine didn't find anything in the user's inventory. So this will allow us to make a final check. If has item is false, then we'll print out the message, you have nothing to discard, and then add our escape sequence there to the end. So we've built quite a bit here. Now we haven't actually allowed the user to make a selection, but let's go ahead and test this now and see if it's working. So we'll run this program, and we'll see, can the user throw something away right now? Hopefully it will let us know that you have nothing to discard. So let's hit T. What would you like to discard? You have nothing to discard, and then it breaks away. If we search for usable items, we now have a rock. Let's hit T for throwaway item, and we'll see that what would you like to discard? Rock does show up on the menu. Now we haven't added our input statement yet, so we definitely have some work to do there, but let's search and see if we can find a shield. There we go, we found a shield. And now we'll check our inventory and see that we're carrying 3 rocks and a wooden shield. And now when we throw away an item, shield gets added to our menu as something that the user can discard. So I've got a pretty good idea that this is working, though I might want to test it and make sure that dagger works. Now I need to do a check, or I need to write in some functionality so that if the user has an item, we use an input statement to decide what the user discards. And we're going to build off the check of our has item. So there's only 2 things that can happen. Has item equals false, or it equals true. So we'll add an else clause in here. And if we get to this else clause, we'll use selection equals input, and then leave a space for our user to input something. This input statement will only execute if has item is true, and has item will only be true if we found something in the user's inventory and printed an appropriate message to them on the screen. We're going to handle this pretty much the same way that we did our last menu. If selection dot lower equals R, then we're going to inventory dot remove rock. And notice we're using remove rock instead of pop. Because we don't know what order everything was picked up on, we don't want to use pop, because if the last thing the user picked up was a shield, they select R and we pop, we might be removing a shield from the list. We're going to handle this pretty much the same way that we handled our menu there at the bottom, by a series of if checks. So if the selection dot lower equals R, then we're going to inventory dot remove rock. And notice we're using remove rock instead of pop this time. That bug that we talked about earlier in this video was caused because we were popping off the last item from a list. Since the last item isn't guaranteed to be a rock, we'll use remove.rock to make sure that a rock gets removed from the inventory. We know that there's a rock in the inventory if this menu item prints right there. So relatively speaking, this should be a pretty safe option. So we're going to remove the rock, and then we'll print, you hurl a rock into the distance, discarding it. So now we'll make our other checks. If selection dot lower equals D, and we know that dagger will only show up on our list if the user has a dagger in their inventory, we will inventory dot remove a dagger. Now, just like we did with the rock, we have to let the user know what happened. So we'll print, you drop your dagger on the side of the road, and we'll make this an elif because the user won't be selecting more than one of these. So we'll use elif selection dot lower finally equals s. We'll inventory dot remove the shield and then print the appropriate message. You place your shield beneath a nearby tree. And then put our escape sequence there on the end. And so the user can select R, D, or S, and if it's anything else, we know that the user has not made a valid selection. So you have not selected a valid item. So now we have an input function that bases itself off of the menu we build when we check the user's inventory when they want to throw something away. So let's delete this code right here. Our old code is kind of unnecessary since we built this from the ground up, and I think we're ready to test this out again. So let's run our program here. You can see that I kind of boogered up the last take there, but just ignore that. Let's go ahead and try to check our inventory, see that we have nothing in our inventory. We'll try and throw away an item, and we are getting you have nothing to discard. Let's search for usable items, and I can see we found a dagger along the side of the path. Check our inventory again. We have 0 rocks, but we do have a dagger. Now let's try and throw away our dagger. What would you like to discard? The only item that we get to choose from is a dagger, and that's because the inventory count of rock and shield is 0, but dagger equals 1, so we're printing out dagger on the menu. So I'll select D to discard the dagger. It says you drop your dagger from the side of the road. This caused inventory.remove dagger to execute, and when we check our inventory, you can see that the dagger has been removed. So let's search. We've got a rock, second rock, third rock. We found a dagger again, and we are able to find a second dagger because our check only the way we wrote our program is you can pick up a dagger as long as you don't have a dagger in your inventory. So let's go ahead and check our inventory now. We have 3 rocks and a dagger. And when we hit T to throw an item away, rock and dagger both show up. So let's throw away a rock. You hurl a rock into the distance. You can see I misspelled hurl. So let's fix that. Check our inventory again. And we now have 2 rocks and a dagger. We go to throw away an item, and let's throw all of our rocks away. We have 1 rock and a dagger. We throw away a final rock. Check our inventory. We now have 0 rocks and a rusty dagger. And finally, we go to throw away an item, and there are no more rocks, so all we can choose is dagger. So that's pretty much it for this video right here. Now I might want to add to this menu right here the ability to choose nothing if we decide that the user wants to back out of throwing something away. So that's really up to you. But we have added code that limits the player's inventory to 5 rocks and no more than 5 rocks. And then we did a lot of work on this throw away function to dynamically build a menu of items to throw away based on what's in the user's inventory. So as we wrap up lesson 24.3, I just want to say I hope that you learned something useful by following along with this. Even though this isn't the greatest program in of itself, the hope is that it gave you some ideas of things that you could program on your own as we continue this kind of like text-based game writing mechanic. Now, if something in here didn't make sense to you or something's not working, you are welcome to leave those questions in the comments, and I'll certainly help you out any way that I can to work through those. We are heading very quickly to project number 6, which is a game very similar to what we've made here, but maybe a little bit more fully developed and with a better idea behind it than simply picking up rocks. You probably want to add some functionality of things that you can do, like maybe fight monsters or adventure or quest. And some of the things that we've done in previous projects. As always, if you have any questions about anything that you saw here or something's not working for you, leave those in the comments and I'll get to them as soon as I can. I'd like to thank everybody for your support of the Python tutorial series. Thanks for watching and have a great day.